I'm Isabella Moreno, and I am presenting on how Okinawa has had their journey through environmental justice and where they are today. So we're just going to dive right in. Overall, this presentation will go through. This presentation will go through the history of Okinawa, and throughout it, we will look at how it has been impacted environmentally, and then go towards how they have started to advocate for themselves. So Okinawa, Japan has had a history of exploitation, and specifically as a landing point between mainland Japan and the rest of the Pacific Islands. And so through its relationship with both mainland Japan and the United States, the Okinawan community and the environment have had to grapple with the injustices that culminated in the now anti-military and strong pro-environment movements. So the story of Okinawa is one of self-advocacy, and it goes for the health and environment of the community. All right, so in the mid to late 1800s, mainland Japan started to annex the southern islands, which are down here, and so right here is Okinawa, and before it was annexed, it was closely related with the eastern part of China, because they were closer than a lot of the cultural centers like Osaka in mainland Japan. And so even now there are still hints of their cultural ties, like these are shisa dogs, and so these are traditionally Chinese, but they made their way to Okinawa, and now they're like a big part of the iconography. But basically, Okinawan citizens started to be treated as second class, and they were mostly exploited because mainland Japan was not seeking a relationship, but more using it as just the land to make sure that it is trying to secure Japan's borders and everything. So during World War I, the U.S. used island hopping to gain strongholds as they made their way from Hawaii to Japan. And Okinawa was one of the many islands, and another example is like Midway. But Okinawa was one of the most important stops towards the end of the journey because it separated the rest of the Pacific Islands from mainland Japan, and then Japan saw that as like their last holdout before the U.S. invaded Japan. And so for that reason, the island was very much used as an area of battle, and both sides went really hard, and this led to a lot of casualties. For Okinawan citizens, it was about 150,000, which is about a quarter of their population at the time. And as you can see, there were a lot of artillery and weaponry used, which both devastated the population and also the environment. And towards the end of the battle, it was just completely ravaged, and there was really nothing left to see there. Before, there was a lot of coral reefs that are still recovering from this, and dugongs, the little like manatee-looking things, they were impacted, and then there were a lot of jungles that were used in the war. So after the U.S. Took control of Okinawa, they started acquiring land to build houses, and this wasn't done by asking landowners or looking for spaces that weren't being used. They were going in and confiscating land for the most part. And so Okinawa was a very agrarian society, and they've become more of a metropolis, but at the time they were very dependent on agriculture for the economy and subsistence. And so when they started taking ideal land for agriculture and turned it into arsenals and airfields, it had a big impact on them. And so it's also important to note that military activities are not at all concerned with the environment for the most part, and it's mostly a matter of security. And so although environmental consciousness has increased in both the US government and society overall, the military remains one of the sectors where we're not making as much progress. And so for a very long time, there was no movement for Okinawan advocacy or for themselves or the environment, but this changed in the 1990s about. So after a long period of unchecked use of Okinawan land, environmentalists and reporters started to focus on the effects of prolonged military presence. So a British reporter, John Mitchell, went to the northern part of the island, which is like more jungle, and he interviewed some people who lived in villages that were near the jungles. And they expressed to him that they were concerned because Agent Orange had been sprayed in the area during the Vietnam War as like testing, and they were concerned for their health, and they wanted him to look further. So then he reached out to American veterans who were stationed on the island at the time. They confirmed they also had sicknesses such as like cancer, and their children had sicknesses, and so they were concerned that this was because of Agent Orange that they were exposed to on the island. And this opened up a whole can of worms, and now there are a lot of researchers who are doing a lot of work looking into how the U.S. has used the northern area of the island and then polluted it. So I personally have strong ties to this because I lived on Okinawa for 4 years, and after living there, I was impacted personally by seeing the protests outside of the base where I went to middle school. Like every time we were driving in, we saw them on every Friday. It was very mathematical. And also, when I was coming home from school, I would hear fighter jets flying overhead, and they would like assault my eardrums. And so there was a lot of noise pollution. And since then, I've reflected a lot on this and become more passionate about seeing the other side, because as an American, I was loving my time there, but now I see that it has had an impact. This happened, So the land has been impacted in many ways, but land degradation is a big one. By paving over jungles and even grasslands, it has added to erosion, and then artillery firing has led to frequent fires. And then finally there's air pollution, noise pollution, and land and water pollution from all of the military activities, which we are going to go into. So Hanoko Base is a proposed base that is going to be in an area that environmentalists find important. And it is an area where Futenma Air Base was going to be relocated for environmental and social reasons. But it is an important spot for dugongs and also coral areas, and so people have been protesting a lot about it. One important group for environmental justice is the Okinawa Environmental Justice Project, which is Okinawa-based, and they are applying anthropology to protect the environment, and they're hoping to, quote, connect the green dots, and so they're working with local and global environmental organizations to advocate for themselves. So they're focusing on Hanoko, which was previously mentioned, and Yambaru, and so this is an area in the northern part of the island that is a World Natural Heritage Site. And so the green part is the actual heritage site, and then right here is the northern training area where the U.S. continues to do training. And they used to do jungle warfare training, which has had a big impact on the UNESCO site. So they have low-flying aircrafts and noise pollution, which have all had an effect on species that are only found in the northern jungle areas. And so they're hoping for the cleanup of the affected site, as well as scientific studies to assess the impacts, and then an agreement to protect the outstanding universal value of the UNESCO site. All right, so U.S. sources have continued to put out drinking water warnings and warnings near affected springs because they have released PFAs and PFOs into groundwater. And so these are forever chemicals that make the drinking water unsafe. And this is just from this year that they're releasing even more restrictions on drinking water in springs. And so research is ongoing into the source of the pollution and the extent of on and off base, but the U.S. has not been particularly open about the source of the contamination, and the military in general has a history of not taking accountability. And so this is actually a study from 2016 where a Japanese researcher, well, two researchers from mainland Japan came and looked at the PFOs in the water, and down here it's like very unsafe levels that you're seeing in fish that people might want to eat, not necessarily Danios, they're really small, but like tilapia, this like has effects on citizens. All right, so Okinawa has so much to offer the world, and they have now turned towards themselves to assess how the use of Okinawan land benefits them. They are more critical of past exploitation and look towards a future of accountability. Despite adversity, protests and movements are created in search of change, and progress is being made today. Specifically for the Okinawa Environmental Justice Project, they are a great example of self-advocacy, and right now they are mostly seeking a wider audience and more exposure. And so I did my part, now it's time to do yours.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.